Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. As always, a huge welcome, anyone that's listening to us for the very first time. This episode, I think, is one of those ones that I will definitely be playing back. This week, I'm joined by Stan Lai. He is a playwright and arguably the most well-known and most influential within the Chinese-speaking world. What really made my ears prick up when I was chatting to Stan is that he made a choice very early on in his career that most people would not make. He walked away from security, from the obvious path, from everything that made logical sense, and instead chose to create from his heart. He did it out of pure faith, and that was faith in something that he could see the possibility in. And it was a deep love for his country and his people and what theatre could do for them at a time where there was almost none. I think a lot of us kind of resonate with that pulling, right? And sometimes we get pulled in a direction that feels entirely illogical. For Stan, that was leaving America, where he could have gone on to pursue probably an amazing career in directing, instead to create a theatre community in Taiwan where there was nothing. You know, we're driven by that sense of what we're meant to do, something that maybe doesn't have a roadmap. And I think that's part of being a visionary human being, that we're meant to build something from nothing. And that can bring up a lot of fear because it's unknown, because it's something that doesn't exist at all. And that can paralyze a lot of us. So we play safe instead. But Stan absolutely did not. What really came through in talking to Stan was his realness, his authenticity, and his clarity. He doesn't romanticize that big leap that he took, but he talks about the discipline and the method alongside the faith and the love for what he was creating. We get into why creativity isn't always just some mystical thing that kind of happens to you, but his belief that it can be something that we can teach and we can learn, or even, I think, as a creative, we learn, unlearn, and then learn again. So many of us are born deeply creative and deeply visionary, but sometimes we lose that through education, or what he calls method and expectation. More on that written in his book, which is called Creativity. I'm making my way through it at the moment because I got sent a copy and it's brilliant. The real work I think we always have to reaffirm within ourselves is just showing up over and over and doing the best you can in the moment and creating from your heart, not your head. And I think that Stan is just such a incredible example of that. This conversation is about faith, craft, and what it takes to build something and stay creative for many, many years to come. So I really hope you love this one. Let's dive in, shall we? Stan Lai, a huge welcome to Maverick Mind.
Hey, Ellie, it's my pleasure. Pleasure is mine. Totally. It's wonderful to see you, to talk to you.
Yeah, likewise. I'm excited to dive into your mind and your story. There's a lot of stories about your stories to tell.
I guess I've been around a little while. That's why.
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to kind of introduce you to the audience, or to kind of dive in first into what led you towards playwriting specifically.
Yes, that's because I wasn't trained to be a playwright, and my initial aspiration wasn't to be a playwright, but to be a director. And I was trained as a theater director at Berkeley, at the University of California, while I was studying for a PhD there. And it's funny because people once there was a time when people said, don't tell people you have a PhD, because if you do, that means that you probably aren't a very good director. But to answer your question, after I finished my studies in California, I went back to Taiwan. I was offered a job And it was the strangest offer because there was there was nothing to offer. There was no theater culture. There was no theater industry in Taiwan at the time. This is 1983. And after the Chinese Civil War in 1949, both sides of, China and Taiwan were not into developing any culture. Anything they did was propaganda. There was no serious, very little serious art, very little serious literature, or, and theater, of course, plays. No one was writing plays. And so I actually went. I don't know, Ellie, if you can understand this, but my wife and I, we talked about it and we said, hey, come on, let's go for it. This is where we come from. We should go back and try to figure out what we can do for our society, even though there's nothing there. And we had this very naive thought that where there is the least, material resources, perhaps there lie the greatest possibilities. And
Mm.
actually, we found the potential there very quickly. And the potential was all human. It's all in the people, the wonderful people in Taiwan, the incredible change that was happening at the time, and is still happening to this day. And my students who I was teaching, I devised an acting training method through them telling stories about their lives. And then we performed those stories and we got an audience. And amazingly, that's how I started, because I was the one who was organizing all these stories and putting them all together into a sort of a collage like shape. And then I started using my own ideas to write plays, and I've been doing that basically a play a year every year. So I've my count is up to 40 now. I've done 40 full-length plays that have all been performed for an audience, and they tour. And it's hard to explain. Last year alone, I had 14 different plays being performed around the Chinese world in different cities, in different productions of mine. So so that's how I started, basically. Without I in my book, Creativity, I write about it and I call it the accidental playwright. That's me. Yeah.
I get that. Yeah, definitely can see that. That's so brave to go into a space where there's nothing like that. Obviously,
Naive,
when you're,
naive.
I think we all need to be a little bit naive and delusional to be brave enough to do those things sometimes.
In a way,
um,
you make sense though. It does. I mean, sometimes you really, if you think too much, you just don't act.
yeah,
If
definitely. But to see something that's actually in need, people need, you know,
Yeah, what we did was we went with our hearts, really, because what I was telling you was really, I mean, anyone who would analyze that situation would say, come on, Stan, you have a PhD from Berkeley, you can get a job anywhere, and you can do whatever you want, in the West. And the freedom of expression is there. If you go back to Taiwan, it's under martial law. Your plays are going to be censored. And you don't have any professional backing. Who would go? So it'd have to be some sort of an inspiration, a sort of out of love. Basically that we loved Taiwan so much that we said, let's just do it and see what happens.
yeah, I'd
and
love to
and my wife
know.
my wife later became my producer and it produces all my plays,
Oh,
so
wow.
basically, yeah,
Dream
right.
team.
I think so.
I'm sure
Yeah,
sometimes not. But on the
actually
whole.
most of the times it is. And yeah, and I mean, if not, I think we would have the working relationship would have broken off long ago. But
Mm.
we still do it, and every day we're talking about different aspects of the work. And you know now 40 years later, it's getting complicated into things like copyright laws, and who wants rights for this play, and blah blah blah. So a
Mm.
lot of very bits and pieces of our life, of our world, are not that interesting, I must say. It's like you doing accounts for your
Oh
yoga
yeah,
classes.
gosh,
Yeah.
that's not my forte at all.
And you have to do it though. Yeah,
But we have to do it. It's just the nature of the
exactly.
beast. Definitely. I was actually just
Yes.
doing that the other day, forcing myself to. Um,
Yeah.
I'm interested to know, coming from
Hmm.
a place where, creativity wasn't necessarily so celebrated, how
Not
did
at
you
all.
get
Yes.
that pulling or that insight or that drive to then study it?
Mm. Well, as I told you, I was trained at Berkeley,
Mm,
and Berkeley is an amazing place. It's a place full of creative energy, full of this liberal, free thought, that is based on compassion. There is, it's not just saying, oh, we're radical, and we don't care about anything. No, we're radical and we care about everything. That's
mm,
what's really radical about coming from Berkeley. If you really are from Berkeley, that's what you are. You really empathize with all of the movements that are going around in the world, and you always are empathizing with the the we're always thinking about how the strong and the weak, you go with the weak, and you see how the world can be a better place. That's I don't know. I think most of my friends who've come out of Berkeley, at least in those days, were like that, and that's how we started. And when you come up with to a society that has no memory of modern theater or no
mm,
knowledge of modern theater, then if you're in a different frame of mind, what you do is, okay, let's fall back on the Western classics and then do all these Western plays, and then we're going to have a theater culture. But no, this is Asia, and this is Taiwan, and this is a Chinese language culture. So how can we create our own theater? That was totally in my mind, and I think that really comes from my Berkeley training, is that anything goes, but anything goes because what you want to do is you want to find what really can make theater work in this world, which is totally different from the world where I learned what it's like. So actually, I must say it wasn't easy, but for us it was, because what I was just saying to you, in the most impoverished of places, you could actually have the most potential because there are no rules. You do
mm.
anything you make can be a play. And then, but of course, will the audience like it? Well, if your heart is with the audience when you are creating it, then you have a good chance. And that's what happened to us. And as I said, to this day, that's what we've been doing.
Yeah, I mean, as you said earlier, when you first kind of said about doing that in Taiwan, of course, then if you're putting on a play, you need actors, right?
Exactly. And
Did
how
you
and
find
they have to be
people?
trained.
Yeah, did you find people that were already like playing around with doing that, or they're
There were there
interested,
was a
or
there was a group called the Lanling, and it was an experimental theater ensemble. And immediately they heard this guy came back from America. They came straight to me and said, "Let's work together," and we did. And it was really really wonderful. I mean, I'm sitting in my living room working with these people. One guy was a telephone line repairman, okay, in the day. The other one was a he moved carpets, he was a mover, and all these people. I had a journalist and a dance instructor, all sorts of different people, not necessarily artistic, and they were. And suddenly we were all together, and we did this beautiful play about mentally challenged children, and that was my first professional production. Yeah, because after I was working with my students at school and we did our first production, so many people came in to see it. And one of them was the head of this. He was doing very innovative things in terms of mentally challenged children, and he said, "Can you do something for us?" And so we did. and that that's part of the story of my story. Is working with these guys, and many of them from Lanling. Later, some of them went back to so-called normal life, and others stayed with me and have been with me for all these decades. And some very incredibly wonderful actors have come from that ensemble.
Wow, that's amazing. I'd love to, I think, because a lot of people are listening to this, or when you're on a creative path, sometimes you can feel a bit like an alien. Like, like
Yes,
we're
yes.
kind of in a world, our own little world that we kind of feel like no one really gets sometimes, unless
Mm-hmm,
you're
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
in community
mm-hmm.
with other creative people who don't think like normal people as well. But
Yeah.
for you, I suppose when you first went back to Taiwan, it was almost quite literally that you were bringing this thing that people maybe didn't hadn't seen or
No,
didn't
they had
understand
never
or
seen, most people had never seen so-called contemporary or modern theater. And so anything we did was it. So in other words, you have a more of a responsibility also to be to what you do. And this is something I talk about in my book also, is like, I mean, it's not just enough to be creative and have, wild thoughts and, think outside the box, whatever, all the time. But more and more, you have to think about why are you doing this?
mm,
Why? I mean, is it just to fulfill yourself? Because there are a lot of artists out there that I'm not saying that's not legit, okay? Because anything is legit. But I'm just saying that if you are out there and you're doing art, painting or doing theater, acting, whatever, and the most important motivation for you is to fulfill yourself. Okay, it sounds very normal, but in the end, you will be limited by that. I don't
mm,
know if you can get my point of view, but the point of view is that the motivation, if your motivation extends to the audience, to your viewers, is that what you want to do is sure, of course, we need self gratification, but if self gratification is the only thing we need, then our work doesn't need to be shown in public, does it? I mean, we just
yeah.
right. So, but if you are really thinking about what you are giving to the world, what are you giving to the world? Does the world need to see what you're doing, or is it just an exercise for yourself? I think you need to ask these questions, and they're difficult questions because we need a lot of. That's where we need courage to really face these questions and answer them.
Yeah. Before we continue, I want to pause and share something that I built for heart led creatives like you. Ember is the supportive space to ground, to regulate, to reset, and to grow. Inside, you'll learn how to work with your creative energy instead of against it, so you can move through blocks and deeply trust your voice. You can try Ember for free for 7 days. Just head to the link in the show notes to join us, and I cannot wait to see you inside. Now, let's get back to the episode. Yeah, and to be really honest with yourself
Exactly.
and your intentions, because I think, especially in the West, it's quite
Hmm.
glamorized sometimes to have a
I
creative
think so.
career, but only when you're
Hmm.
like at the top of your game. When you're on your
Mm.
way up, then it's like, oh, well, then you're a struggling artist. But
That
when
makes
you're,
sense. That makes sense.
yeah, when you're at the top of the
Yeah.
game, it's quite glamorized. And then I think people think that they want that for some kind of, it's almost like they're being loved then.
Yeah. Yeah.
But as you said
Yeah.
earlier, when you're saying you took your plays to Taiwan from
Hmm.
love,
I
right?
think so. I think so. I think for the motivation there was to create a theater culture, if possible, and not saying that, oh, I can do this. I hadn't, we weren't, that sure that we could achieve what we have achieved at all. We just, all you can do is tune into the society, tune in to what really concerns you about and what you're seeing every day and making them into works. So the second play of my theater group is 40 years old. Uh, and so 40 years ago, we did a play called Secret Love in Peach Blossom Land. And the name is complicated. I translated straight from the Chinese name because
Mm.
it's two plays. It's one play is called Secret Love and one play is called Peach Blossom Land. And they two groups are mistakenly booked into the same theater for a dress rehearsal. Okay. And they can't find the theater manager. And this is something that happened all the time to us in Taiwan. It's like we would be working in the theater and suddenly someone else shows up and says, "Hey, what are you guys doing here?" And we're saying, "We're working. This is ours. We rented this space." And they say, "No, no, 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 no. You didn't rent this space." And and nobody can figure out what happens. And so it's a comedy, but it's also very serious and also very. There's a lot of very moving parts to it, and so it has survived for 40 years. We're still performing it. And New York Times called it the most popular contemporary play in the Chinese language. And I think that's true. So what I'm saying is, what you were saying is you have all these crazy ideas, right? It was a crazy idea to start with. But to me, this crazy idea also I, I'm always thinking about how an audience will interact with this crazy idea. I'm not just thinking of the crazy idea itself, you see. And so that's why it has always landed in an audience, and the audience has the empathy to go with it. And we're always this play. It's funny. It's been 40 years, but it's always a little ahead of the audience. Because you don't know what's coming up next because suddenly someone comes in and says, "Hey, this is not your time, this is our time," and they take over and you're watching a totally different play and you don't know where this is going. And then the other guys come back and they say, "Look, we found our papers, you have to leave." And they just keep fighting for the stage. And so you're seeing a bit of each of these, the two plays, you're seeing them in fragments until the finally in the end you figure out what's going on in both of these plays. So
Ah.
so it's what I'm saying is it's to this year we're making two new productions. One is in Taiwan, one is in China, and they'll be performing in March, which is the 40th anniversary. Because I don't know, it's if you ask people in China or in the Chinese world about theater or a play, this is the play that they will talk about.
Wow. I can imagine. I'd love to see it. I can imagine that being really something that it grips you because you're kind of always trying to figure out what's going to happen next or what's going on here and what's going on there. Yeah, I love that idea. Through
Well,
the
mm,
through that whole 40 years and along that path, at what point did you then start to feel inspired to kind of collect all of your ideas about creativity into your work?
great question. Okay. Well, as I told you, I started out as a teacher. I was teaching at the university level, theater history, acting, directing, playwriting, and often I felt frustrated because I felt that if you were a talented a director, I could make you I could make you more creative. But if you didn't have it, I couldn't make you creative. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like
Mm.
maybe I don't know how that translates to other things, but basically creativity itself was not something that was part of my job description. It was like I'm not supposed to teach this because supposedly people who have it, or people who can get it, it comes from the muses or it comes from the air or something like that. So I never gave it given much thought because my teachers never even talked about this topic of, can you be creative? Can creativity be learned? That's the topic. Can it
Mm.
be taught and can it be learned? And so I went along with my teaching, kind of frustrated because sometimes you would get students that just wouldn't be able to, couldn't get them to nudge, and I would be so frustrated. Then one year this was around 20 some years ago. I was in India and traveling with the French writer Mathieu Ricard, the Buddhist monk. And we were talking about this concept in Buddhism that you need two things to progress on the path, which is wisdom and method. And this is something I'd read like 100 times, and we talked about many, many times in classes and concepts. But suddenly it came to me, said, well, this is not just Buddhism. This works for everything. Like yoga, Ellie. It's like,
Mhm.
you can have method, right? I mean, teachers can teach method, but if you don't have the wisdom of yoga, your students aren't going to be very good. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like meditation is the same, or
Mhm.
if you don't, I mean, I can teach you all sorts of methods about meditation, but if I don't have the wisdom of it, I'm sort of blind leading the blind. And then I thought about it and I said, wait a minute, this definitely holds true for creativity. Is that,
Mhm.
you know, in the arts, we only teach method. I'm teaching you directing. I'm teaching you how to direct a play.
Very
I'm not
true.
teaching you the wisdom of directing a play, or maybe some of my wisdom, if I have any, may rub off on you. Okay, but then there comes the question: Do teachers have wisdom? All right. So the teachers who teach acting or directing or playwriting, are they wise themselves? And if they aren't, then there's no way you're going to get any wisdom. Let's say you're studying at Royal Academy or whatever in London, or let's say you're at the Royal Academy of Music. Let's say you're doing piano, and basically they're teaching you method, right? I mean,
Mm.
who's gonna teach? I recall the great Chinese concert pianist of Fu Cong. He passed away a few years ago. He and I were friends, and one day I met him in Taipei, and he was having acupuncture for his fingers that were arthritic, and I saw him in a lot of pain, and I mean just mental pain is more than physical
Yeah.
pain, because if you're a pianist and you can't and your fingers are arthritic, it's really really suffering.
Yeah.
And I said, how you been, what have you been doing? And he said, I'm fine. I'm being a juror for a lot of international piano competitions. I said, oh, so what's it like? And he said, oh my God, the the youngsters these days, their fingers are so incredible, amazing. I said, "Oh, that's good." We were speaking in Chinese, and suddenly he
Mm.
broke into English, and because he lived in London at the time, he suddenly looked at me and broke into English. He said, "But where is the music?" Okay,
Mm.
so you got the fingers, but you don't have the music. And to me, that is the perfect example of method, fingers, and wisdom, music.
Mm.
So I suddenly had a sort of epiphany in India saying, wait a minute, we're only teaching half of this. And if we're only teaching half of this, where do we get the other half? Who's going to be responsible for that other half? And I suddenly realized we're not going to teach this in school. So in our conservatories, in our academies, you're going to learn method. Even in business school, you're going to learn method. But wisdom, this thing, has to be learned in life. So it's a different domain, and you have to be responsible for learning that. And so that's where my whole breakthrough in teaching creativity came, and I thought of writing this book. So I finally finished this book in 2006, 20 years ago, in Chinese. I wrote it in Chinese, and it's sold 1 million copies in the Chinese
Wow.
world. Yeah, I didn't know it was sold that much until I decided to do the English version, which just came out. Yeah.
Wow. Amazing. That's really interesting as well, especially that you kind of came to that realization in India, because in Indian philosophy, in
Yes.
tantric philosophy and yoga philosophy,
Mm.
which are the same thing, um, it's kind of said that creative energy is our life force, is
Totally.
prana,
I
is
like
our
that.
life
I
force, and it
like that.
runs through
Prana,
everyone.
yes. Oh,
It's
I
whether
totally
you're
agree.
an artist, whether you're a scientist, whether whoever else, your creative energy and your life force energy are the same thing.
And that's why I've come to the conclusion that we're all creative. We're born
Yeah,
creative.
we
But
definitely are.
but we get blocked from our creativity. We create walls, we create borders, and for some of us, I think maybe you and I, we're luckier. Our walls are very thin, so it's easy to break through and find that creativity. But for many people, it's tough, because you get that wall gets built by your family who loves you,
Mm.
by your school, your teachers who also love you, your classmates, society, life, is building all these walls that are blocking you from your own creativity, and so a lot of in my book, I say a lot of creativity is not learning something, but unlearning things that
Mm.
you've that have become you thought that these things were so important or so standard, but who said who said they're standard? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's definitely true. And unlearning a lot of your own beliefs about stuff.
Beliefs, concepts, labels. I think to be creative, you need to be able to delabel everything. Like
Yeah.
if I can delabel what I'm looking at right now. Wow, how weird! This I'm looking at this thing that is bright. This luminous thing, and Ellie is there. You see, what is this? And you can immediately, once you delabel, it's so amazing. It can be, you see so many creative possibilities there. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. That's
Yeah.
actually something I learned at university. I studied fashion design, even though I'm a yoga teacher now, but I studied fashion design.
Mm.
And we learn a lot of technique in fashion about how to
Method,
make clothes,
method.
how, yeah, a lot of method,
Yes.
a lot of tailoring. And I think that's a really interesting thing to learn as
Mm.
well, the kind of craft of it.
Mm.
Um, and as you say, when you were talking about that, I was like, did we learn a lot of, you know,
Did you learn wisdom? Well,
wisdom? I don't know if we did learn a lot of wisdom, but there was like one thing I remember really learning, probably in my second year of university, where we were really taught to look at things not for what they are, but what they could be.
there you go.
So, like, I remember looking at a bridge and instead of seeing it as a
Mm.
bridge, seeing it as a hem of a jacket
There you
or
go.
something like that. And I think that
That's what
that
I'm
is,
saying. It's the
yeah,
delabeling thing is taking the
yeah,
label off of something. Yeah,
yeah.
that's definitely it. When I was writing the book, I went to Webster's dictionary to see what their take on wisdom was. And believe it or not, it said wisdom is the quality of being wise. Okay? And so
Okay.
I cross-checked wise, and wise said characterized by wisdom. I swear you can check it yourself. And I went, what, something happened here, like what, why aren't they defining wisdom? Don't they know? Or are they cheating or what? I mean, like a dictionary can't, it's not, you can't say that, right? You can't
Yeah.
say wisdom is the quality of being wise. That's cheating, you know. But but then I realized after talking with many friends, very learned intellectuals, they said wisdom is something that is not easily defined in this day and age because you have to figure it out yourself. And I think that makes sense, and in this day and age, you know, uh, that wisdom has everything to do with your definition of what is going to make you happy in your life. We don't often equate wisdom with happiness, but that's what it is basically, because we think of wisdom as something very, very profound, but wisdom can be also very banal. It can be very, like someone whose wisdom quotient is very low. I mean, there
Mm.
isn't something called a wisdom quotient. Maybe someone would, invent it, but then the wisdom there is like, wisdom is, a nice pasta dinner. That's the ultimate goal of life, you know. Or like you say, you were a fashion designer, so to get one of these beautiful clothes, that's to achieve that. That's what I want, and it's what you want. That's your wisdom. So if you think deeper and you're thinking about all sorts of things, life, people, inequality, all these things, then your wisdom quotient then grows, and your art grows, and whatever you're doing grows. The million people who read my book in Chinese, they certainly aren't all artists. They're all sorts of people. They tell me educators, business people that have gotten something from the book, and even now there are 8 universities in China who are getting together to unitedly create a department of creativity, like an actual formal studies in creativity. And they're using my book as the basis for that department. So
Wow. That's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
Well
Well,
done.
I do think I have. Well done. I don't know. We just do what you can do, Ellie.
Yeah.
And then the results happen if there is the possibility for them to happen. And I guess it has happened. Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I do think I have something to say for people who are interested in discovering their own creativity, or if they are artists in themselves. I do. I really believe I do have something to say because I'm on both sides. I'm an artist myself, and
Mm.
then I've been teaching how to make theater for over 20 years. I've been doing it for over 40 years, and I stopped teaching about 15 years ago. Once in a while I still do it, but more concentrated on the creative part.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to say as well, I think a lot of wisdom comes from lived experience and like feeling something and then
Totally,
putting it
totally.
into whatever you're creating as well.
Right. And then what you're saying, then putting it into whatever you're creating, that's the method part. And sometimes the
Mm.
method part drives you crazy, right? Because you feel what you want to do, but then you don't know how to give it a form. You can't give your expression the proper form. That means you have a wisdom part of the equation, but it doesn't work, because it can't translate into an actual thing. It drives
Yeah,
people crazy. Yeah.
it definitely does. It drives us all a bit mental.
Yeah.
If someone imagine like if someone's feeling creatively blocked, they could be an artist or they could be somebody that's just trying to discover their creativity. What are some things that you would guide them towards to maybe discover their own expression or their own wisdom?
Well, I've been doing it long enough to know that when I get blocked, and I do, you have to know how to let go. You just have to
Mm.
let go of your project for a while. Do something silly, like, watch a stupid action movie, or, go out and maybe go bowling or something. It's something silly. You have to you have to do something silly. And then maybe, I mean, for me, that's all it takes. It takes a couple hours, and I'm back on my feet. And for many people, it can take days or even weeks or months. But sometimes we're clutching too hard, and sometimes the breakthrough is you have to figure out what is the problem. The problem is on the method side, or the problem is on the wisdom side. If the problem is on the method side, just bear with it, and you'll find a way to figure it out. But if the problem is on the wisdom side, you're going to have to maybe stop the whole project for a while, and just figure out you know that part. And that part you can only learn in the domain of life. You have to figure out in life where you are, and then go back. What are your main concerns in life? What is driving you? What is driving you to do this, to make this work? And if you can't figure it out, that work is not going to go anywhere. If suddenly you can figure out, I think it'll come back to life, and you can start working on it again.
That's really true. I always think that as creatives, we're kind of like sponges, and you kind of
Yeah,
get full of like whatever's around us in the sponge.
totally. We
Sponge
are.
analogy, it'd be like water, but through life, through experiences and everything, and then you kind of wring it out into your work.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes if
Mm-hmm.
you, your idea is not really sitting right, or you struggling to get an idea at all, it's because there isn't enough water in that
Or you don't know
sponge.
the proper way to ring it, and
Yeah,
so it doesn't come
exactly.
out right. I
Yeah.
like that. I like what you say. Yeah, that's very true. And sometimes many of us are very sensitive, so that's why we sponges are overflowing. We just have there's just
Mm.
there's all liquid, and sometimes that's not good. I mean, sensitivity is important, extremely important for creative people. But I don't know. I think the super sensitive then become what, like shamans or something, which is fine, you know. Um, but uh, I don't know. There was one play I did was about a woman who I wrote a play about a woman who believed her husband, who had abandoned her, had been abducted by aliens. Okay. So I did a lot of research and I realized that there are many people who claim they are abducted by aliens, but they're they're super sensitive people. And so there's something maybe that happens to them we don't quite understand, but they weren't abducted by aliens.
Mm.
They just really believed that they were. So it's a two double-edged to be sensitive. You have to you have to know how to regulate that sensitivity, basically.
Yeah, definitely. In the same light, I was saying earlier from like yogic or tantric philosophy that we have everybody has this creative energy. It's also believed that it's the creative energy would be like the feminine energy, or within like more Chinese medicine be like yin energy. And then there's a
Hmm.
masculine energy, the yang energy. And if you have too much creative energy or too much feminine energy within you, no matter your gender, it creates chaos
Oh,
without
for
the kind
sure.
of
Yeah.
without the kind of parameters of the masculine structure or systems, or maybe not being so emotionally led.
Well
You
said.
kind of
Well
need
said.
that around
Hmm.
this kind of pen around the creative energy to kind of then the kind of channel it in the most innovative
Otherwise,
way.
there's no form to it. There's no
Mm.
way to, and form and structure are the such important things for creative people. Like, I mean, even like, I mean, to write a play or to write a film or, uh, it's all about structure. It's all about structure in time. Which is even more complicated because it's moving. And so from minute one to minute 120, where are you taking us? Where are you taking the audience? So that's method, but that's wisdom, as you can see. You
Yeah,
need both.
definitely.
Yeah.
And when you're in the process of writing, well, it could be a
Hmm.
player, I guess it could have been your book as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
Do you find that you give yourself a lot of structure around your writing, or do you kind of just allow it to spill out of you and go wild?
It depends on the project. Often I try to give it as much structure as possible. A couple of my plays have come from structure. So I start with the structure, and then the work. It's like I'm penciling in, the form of a building, and then we build the building. But sometimes
Mm.
I'm just going free form and say whatever, we're going wherever this takes us. So I've done both. And but I do think even when you're doing this free form thing, you do need a sense of structure. And that basically is simply said is how things are put together so that they don't fall apart. Because nobody wants to see a play that falls apart, right? Even if it's very, very fragmented, that
Mm.
doesn't mean it'll fall apart. There's some very fragmented works that are extremely structural. So, but you do need the structure. Otherwise, you have no better tool to keep your audience with you.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely true for what you do for
Hmm.
playwriting or directing. But I can imagine also for other things as well, like within fashion, if you're showing
Hmm.
a collection, there's kind of a structure or a thread that runs through each piece, so it all tells a
For
story.
sure. For sure.
And I
Yes.
can,
Yes.
and
Yes.
same, I suppose, when if you're doing painting or anything, to kind of
Hmm.
have something that kind of gives you a little bit of a boundary that might come a bit more intuitively. But yeah, definitely. When you were kind of at the beginning of your career,
Hmm.
did you ever fear kind of sharing your work, or did you just go about it playfully and see what happens?
I just went about it really intensely, and I don't think I had that much fear. I just had a lot of curiosity, a lot of interest in how the audience would feel about these things. But I don't know. I don't know where I got this sort of confidence. But I I've always been a confident playwright and director. Yeah. So everything we did was new. I was wondering how the audiences would react to it, and I would also be very critical of myself. Like in terms of wisdom and method, in terms of seeing, is your craft up to it? Is it up to what you're trying to achieve? Because when you start out, a lot of the frustration for starting artists, I think, comes from the fact that they're not good enough at what they do. And
Mm.
I'm not saying this as a criticism, because everyone has to go through this stage, because you can't get good without the process, right? If you don't have the chance to sew 1,000 dresses, how can you become competent as a seamstress? Right? I mean, you can't just say, I'm competent and you've done 5 dresses. No, it doesn't work that way. I mean, for us, if you haven't directed 10 plays, 20 plays, I don't know. I don't see where you can get the confidence to say, I know what this is all about. You really have to, what is Malcolm Gladwell with his theory of the 10,000 hours that you need to put in your field to become a very extreme. I don't know if you want to call it a master, or he calls it just very proficient in your field. And I think it's he even said 10,000 is just a number, but I get it. You do need to spend hours and hours of practice and actually doing before you master your craft. And once you master your craft, then the rest of it is the wisdom part of it, which of course is amazingly large.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's not just mastering your craft, but craft is so important to the artist. Yeah,
Definitely.
I think. Yeah, I was just in New York, and a friend of mine was working at the Metropolitan Museum and asked me to see if I invited me to go in and see this special exhibition on Man Ray.
Mm.
Amazing, amazing stuff. And I was looking at all revisit. It's like revisiting old friends when you go into those galleries and see, Renoir and Van Gogh, and you know, and then wow, and you revisit them, and you see how amazing the technique is. It's not just that they move you, but how do they move you? Because the
Mm.
technique is impeccable, because they know what they're doing. They knew that this stroke of the brush is creating this sort of a movement, and will create this sort of a emotion in the audience. This is an amazing kind of knowing that comes when you're at the top of your game in the craft, but you have to be there in order to become a master.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on the way, you have to give yourself a lot of permission to get things wrong and to
Totally. That's what
try
it's all
stuff
about.
and fail, which I think some people really don't allow within themselves. We kind of want
You
our next
have to.
piece. Our next
If
piece has
you
got to be a ticket to the big time, but it's also allowed to fail.
no,
And if it
if
fails,
you
it doesn't mean anything about you.
no, no, if you don't fail, how can you know what success is if you don't fail?
Exactly. Yeah. And
Yeah.
sometimes failing takes you somewhere that's more interesting. Anyway.
Always. Yes. Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I kind of want to finish up with the last two questions that I ask everybody. I'm
Hmm.
really intrigued to
Oh,
know what
okay.
you're gonna
All
what you're
right.
gonna say, Stan.
All right. Okay.
So
Okay.
the first one is, what would you say is the most common misconception people have either about you or about the work that you do, or both?
Oh, that's interesting. I in the Chinese world, I'm somewhat of a celebrity, in at least in the theater world. So if I'm like at the Uzun Theater Festival, which I co-founded, which has become like the biggest theater festival in Asia, basically, I walk on the street, and people, I mean, I've experienced this. People like 1 foot away from me are gonna say, "Oh, that's Stan Lai," and I'm going, "Wait, I'm a human being, right? Why
Yeah.
don't you just say hi? And so I think people don't. There's no way they can understand me. They think they think you're this artist or whatever, this celebrity or whatever. But come on, I'm just a person. I'm just a normal person, and and I'd really treasure it much more if you just said hello and we looked at each other in the eye and I said hi, than if you shouted at your friend and say, "Hey, that's Stan Lai." So that's one thing that bothers. I don't know if it answers your question or not, but that's one thing that gets me.
Yeah, I can imagine that is like a misconception that people think that they can't just come up and talk to you. And I don't see why, because you seem like the easiest person to walk up to in the world.
Thank you. Thank you. It's you see that's a concept that is in the mind of other people. It's not me. If you came up to me and talked to me, I will talk to you. You know,
Yeah.
I
But
would
I
I would never
think,
say I will not talk to you, right?
yeah, but I think often when somebody is like well known or well loved for whatever they do, we do have this idea that they're somehow not human anymore.
That's it. That's exactly what I'm saying. So I'm
Yeah.
not human. I'm like a wax figure or something like that walking around.
That's so funny, but I can't imagine that. The second question is if you look back over your life, it doesn't just have to be your
Hmm.
career, it could be before that as well,
Okay.
and think about a really memorable conversation that you had. Who were you with, and what was said that really stuck with you?
Okay. There's a very famous Chinese novelist named Jin Yong. He wrote all the great swordsman novels, okay, that were made into movies and everything like that. I, when I was starting out in my career, I had lunch. I mean, there was a whole table of people, and I wound up sitting next to him. And I'm going, wow, I'm sitting next to Jin Yong, the great novelist. And I said, I'm thinking, what am I gonna say to him? You know, and I said the stupidest thing you could possibly say. I said, sir, how do you write your novels? and and once I said it, I said, oh no, can I get that back? But no, you cannot get it back. It came out of your mouth. So he was so kind. He turned to me and he said, what I do is I spend a lot of time on the characters. So I spend maybe half a year to a year figuring out who the characters are and not writing any scenarios or story. There's no story, there's only people. Once they're totally firm in my mind, he said, and this is what blew my mind. He said, they write the novel.
Mm,
And that stuck with me. And that's often what I do too. Yeah, if I have the right actors, this is what they'll do for me. So if you
mm,
think if you it's so true though, it's like
yeah,
you figure them all out and then you put these people together and they will figure out what to do to each other.
yeah,
And yeah,
yeah. I
you
can
give them
definitely
something
see
to do,
that.
they'll yeah, 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 yeah. I thought it was one of the great lessons I got, a master class at the luncheon table, So you never know when you're going to learn something, and that was one thing I
Yeah,
really learned.
definitely. I love that. I
Yeah.
can see that definitely being a kind of guiding voice along your
Yes.
career. But I think I can also
Yes.
see that applying for different things, not just story writing as well.
Oh no, I can see that working for a lot of businesses and projects. Like
Mm,
yeah, yeah, I don't
yeah.
know, AI maybe. People developing AI figure
Who
them out
knows?
and then put them together, and
Who
they'll do
knows?
it themselves. Yeah,
Definitely. Who knows? Well, let's
it's a
see.
little scary, a little scary.
Love that. Oh, amazing, Stan. It's been such a pleasure to have you on the show. I will leave the links below in the show notes for everyone to find you. But for everyone ready to find everything that you do now, where's the best place for them to start?
Uh, Shanghai or Taipei, lots of activities coming up. Now, Chinese New Year, everything is slowing down, but
Mm.
March, April, May, lots of performances of my plays in Taiwan, in all over China also. So if you're in the region and you want to see some interesting theater, check it out.
Yeah, definitely. I
Yeah.
definitely hope everyone in that area will go and check it out right away. If I'm ever in the area, I'll definitely come and check it out.
Please do. Please do. Please let me
um,
know.
definitely. Well, thank you
Yeah.
everyone for listening. As always, then share this episode with your friend and let us know if you found anything particularly inspiring. I'm sure there's many little things you picked up from this episode. But thanks again for listening, everybody, and I'll see you again next week. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Maverick Mind. I hope that you've loved it, and if you have, I would appreciate it so much if you would subscribe and write a 5-star review on wherever you're listening to this podcast from. If you'd like to keep the conversation going, I invite you to join me over on Instagram at Maverick Mind Co. or on my website maverickmind.elliefoden.com. And I'll see you in another podcast very, very soon.